And I think it can be both deregulation, but it can also be re-regulation, in the sense of changing regulations and making them more appropriate for competition policy. And in the EU, there's been a particular focus on making sure that states, national states in this case, did not favor their local national firms. And that's been an important aspect of European competition policy, in which they try to restrict, wow, that's only, okay, 10 minutes? Okay. So to restrict, make sure that European Union firms did not get aid from their own governments. I think this is something we've discussed a lot here about the role of oblasts and regions here, and I think that's an important part of competition policy. I'm going to skip over the Australian experience because to make sure I have the time, and I wanted to go into one aspect, which is Russia. Here we have the Russia. You have Russia as the black line on the all to the right, and again, this is this product market regulations. And it's Russia's basically, according to the numbers I have, the second worst, in a sense, of the world. Only China beats it, and every single other one has actually improved over time, as I mentioned before. So here we have Russia. So you have a lot of room to improve regulations, and there's been actually a lot of these issues in Russia referred to the issue which was being raised again by the governor and others, about the unequal application of existing regulations and asymmetric access to state aid that favor larger, less productive incumbents. Right? And that's something which has been repeated a lot, so I'm not going to go into much, but it's particularly important at the regional level. And here you have this measure broken up into components. You can break up this measure of competition policy into three components. One is basically the state control of business enterprises, where Russia is particularly large. I think that's been mentioned here about privatization. So privatization is obviously an important component of any improvement in Russia's competition. Second is the legal and administrative barriers, which the ministers also talked about. Russia there is more in line with international experience, but there's improvements that can be made. And then finally, there is the gray one, which is the barriers to trade and investment, where again, Russia does have a significant challenge ahead. And this refers to what we mentioned before of the entry into the World Trade Organization, which would presumably push Russia, reduce that gray measure of lack of competition. I wanted to measure here just very quickly the implications for the Russian Federation of these doing business indicators, which we calculate. And the ministers already mentioned some of these numbers, so I'm going to go into this slide, which I thought would be interesting for you. We did this. The ministry. We did this study on regional applying the doing business indicators to the regions, and there were a lot of differences. As you know, when we do the doing business indicators across the world, we use the capital city or the main business center, which is Moscow in Russia. But we thought it would be very interesting to do the same thing for regions. And there's a lot of variation. And I think some of the comparisons are actually quite striking. The cost of starting a business is twice as high in Moscow as compared to Kazan, right? I think some of the trade numbers in terms of trade across borders is also in Moscow is about double. In dealing with construction permits, Moscow was also the worst. It's a shame the mayor is not here. He would be interested in these numbers. And I wanted to point out that if you do some of the comparisons of these cities with other parts of the world, you know, it's the procedures and costs required to build a warehouse in Voronezh is about the same as in Liberia. So, I mean, you have a long way to go in terms of improving your doing business indicators. You can actually take these regional cities and compare them, because they're based on objective criteria. You can compare them across any city included in the doing business in the world, and you can do these comparisons. And Rostov-on-Don, it's the first place on building a warehouse in the Russian Federation. It's about as easy to build a warehouse there as it is in Portugal. So I think you still have quite a long way to go in terms of doing your business environment, as the Minister was saying. I just wanted to finish with this slide here about what we're doing in the future with the Ministry of Economic Development. I think the first thing is, as the Minister was saying, is trying to get a sense of a baseline on some of these key regulations and policies. So we will be doing with the Ministry some work on understanding the anti-competitive effect. I think one of our fellow speakers was talking about that, of regulations and policies. And then we're going to do a lot of work on the regional level of trying to create these regional PMRs. We will continue to enlarge the regional doing business indicators, where the Ministry is very interested. And we'll also be looking at calculation of sector markups, which is another issue raised here, and trying to see how competition is, how strong it is in each region. And then finally, I wanted to finish with this, because to place competition policy in all the discussions that you've had here in Russia regarding diversification of exports and innovation. In reality, as I said at the beginning, you have in the center of this slide, you have the emergence of productive and innovative firms. And around that, you have a series of policies that you need to improve to have these firms. At the bottom, you have access to inputs at competitive prices. That implies, of course, in many cases, if you're going to exports, that implies having relatively open trade barriers, because most exporters rely on imports to, I understand, imports to export. You need competition policy, which is the center of any improvement in long-term productivity, and you have innovation policies. Then you have industrial policies, which you focused a lot, which is really more specific attempts to change specific industries. My recommendation would be that we should focus a lot more on the base, which is on competition policy, on innovation more generally, and on trade policies, than just focusing on industrial policy. You should focus more on the base and just on the right-hand bottom corner. And with that, thank you very much.